Hey, how's it going, guys? It's Nate here. And the Fallout universe is quite a vast and expansive one. Stretching multiple games and literal centuries, Bethesda Game Studios and the folks who sold it to them really built quite the gripping franchise. And fitting for their unique narrative, the Fallout games are populated with some of the most creative and interesting characters you'll ever meet. From robotic presidents to tree people, near total atomic annihilation really seems to have spawned some fascinating persons and personalities. And apparently, the developers have decided that some of these characters were just so fascinating that they decided to include them in more than just one Fallout title. So I thought, what better way to spend the day than diving into some of the coolest cases of characters that were so nice we got to see them twice. Sit back and relax as we dive into my top 5 returning characters across the Fallout franchise. Starting off, we have Serie Petrova. Her most recent appearance in Fallout occurs in Fallout 4's Nuka World DLC, where we can find her standing outside of the Fizz Top Grill, arguing with a disciple raider, questioning the bandit on where she can find certain items she's looking for, much to the raider's annoyance.
I'm not here for the market. I didn't travel hundreds of miles to go shopping.
I don't suppose you came here for a bullet in the brain either. So if you want to live, I suggest you stay where you belong.
Oh, you guys are real friendly, aren't you?
When approached, Sierra will inform the player that she's undeniably Nuka-Cola's biggest fan, and has traveled hundreds of miles to visit Nuka World in order to learn more about the brand, and hopefully load up on collectibles to bring home to her Nuka-Cola Museum that she claims to run. Sierra will offer the sole survivor the quest, Cappy in a Haystack, which sends you to find a number of hidden mascots across the park. Sierra believes that discovering all of them will grant her access to Nuka-Cola's long-hidden secret recipe. It's a long story, but believe it or not, she isn't entirely wrong. Well, if you've played Fallout 3, which takes place about 10 years prior to the events of Fallout 4, that name, Serie Petrova, very likely rang a few bells. As in that game, at the small two-shack settlement of Girdershade, we can meet that very same woman, who indeed had a small Nuka-Cola museum she'd allow us to tour for free.
I take it you're here to check out my Nuka-Cola collection and take the tour. Well, come on then! Let me show you around. But no free Nuka-Cola until the end of the tour.
In Fallout 3, Serie Petrova would also ask that the Lone Wanderer go out and collect her Nuka-Cola quantum bottles. This was the basis of the quest, the Nuka-Cola Challenge. Funnily enough, she was never actually classified as essential, meaning if you pleased, you could have murdered her to death. But regardless, it's nice to know that in the official canon lore, 10 years later, Sierra and her passion are still alive and as active as ever before. Next on our list, for most of us, our first encounter with the character named Harold was probably an interesting one. This strange man could have been met if the player paid a visit to a location called the Oasis in Fallout 3. Upon walking up to the place, you would be greeted by some armed fellows in robes, who during their first conversation with you, would announce that their divine god wanted to meet you, and didn't like to be kept waiting, before inviting you into the compound. Obviously an odd initial impression by these people, but inside the Oasis, you'd find what seems to have been one of the only remaining bastions of nature and green left in what was once America's capital. Beautiful and tall trees grow from the ground, decorated with lush and healthy-looking leaves. The people here call themselves the Tree Minders, and they seem to be a cult worshipping a still somewhat unclear god, claiming that this oasis is a gift from him, whom they still want you to meet. But before you can be allowed such a privilege, they'll demand that you participate in a ritual, wherein they chant some prayers around you, you drink from some tree sap, and pass out, only to awake in a small enclosure. And lo and behold, you'll finally get to meet this god figure in the flesh. Or perhaps bark. You see, their god is just a talking tree. Well, kind of. The tree will inform you that he's actually just a normal man, or used to be. His name's Harold, and long ago while exploring an old pre-war military base, he was attacked by strange mutants. At some point during the battle, he found himself unconscious, and awoke in the middle of a desert. Slowly after this mysterious experience, Harold began to mutate, and a tree started to grow from his head. Eventually, it just sort of got so big and rooted down that he found himself trapped inside of it, here in the capital wasteland.
Neither have I. Well, I talked to Herbert, but he never really says anything back. Do you, Herbert? He kept growing around me. Maybe for calling him Herbert all the time.
Harold will tell you that he's been living like this, completely still, for literal decades, and he's by no means a god. In fact, he just wants his life to be over. Unfortunately, the tree miners that discovered him think he's divine, thanks to the nature his mutation has spawned. You'll ultimately be presented with a choice. Put Harold out of his misery like he asks, or aid the cult in ensuring he continues to grow and his gifts can be shared with the wastes. Well, funnily enough, while this encounter with him is definitely hard to forget, it's by no means our first meeting with Harold in the Fallout franchise. In fact, this fellow had appeared in every single Fallout game prior to 3. In Fallout 1, we meet him as a sickly mutant in Old Town. He looks a bit like a ghoul, though it's obvious he's no ordinary mutant, and provides some information to help you in the game's main storyline. Actually, his role in Fallout lore is pretty significant. Also, the tree is already growing out of his head, though it's not quite as big to limit his mobility just yet. In Fallout Brotherhood of Steel, he could be encountered again as a merchant, and the tree on his head would be a little bit bigger. And then again in Fallout 2, he lives in Gecko, a ghoul town, and evidently by then, the tree's gotten really big, like noticeable now. And seemingly at some time between 2 and 3, he must have made his way to the capital, before that tree mutation just got the best of him. What happens next is up to you. Coming at number 3, while we're still mentioning the isometric Fallout games, in Fallout 2, a friendly super mutant by the name of Marcus could be encountered. Marcus was the sheriff of the town of Broken Hills, a mining community in what was once Nevada. The tale he'd tell you was and is an absorbing one. Once a typical human-hating, baby-eating super mutant, after the events of Fallout 1, he and a Brotherhood of Steel paladin named Jacob crossed paths. The pair, being natural sworn enemies, started battling, but neither could get the best of the other, and as hours turned into days, they both sort of just gave up and started laughing. And thus, a friendship was born, and they began wandering the wastes together.
That was Jacob, from the Brotherhood of Steel. He'd sworn some oath to destroy muties. We tussled for a while. Probably a day or two. After a while, we just started laughing. What was the point?
Eventually, they started to build a following of sorts. A man in full power armor and a literal super mutant make quite a strong team. So, as you might imagine, there were a lot of people willing to play for that team and be protected by it. Soon, the group decided to settle down near a uranium mine, and created the town of Broken Hills, where man and mutant live in harmony. Kind of. Some humans are conspiring against the mutants. In Fallout 2, we can help Marcus rid his town of those anti-mutant conspirators. Alas, if you've picked up Fallout New Vegas, that won't be the last you get to see of Marcus. As in the Obsidian game, we can cross paths with the human-tolerating mutant again. By the time of New Vegas, he's now moved on from Broken Hills, and founded an entirely new community in the Mojave Wasteland. Its name? Jacobstown, after the paladin he met so long ago.
Welcome to Jacobstown, human. You're free to walk around, just don't stare at the Nightkin. They don't like people looking at them. And if you're NCR, keep it to yourself. They're not popular around here.
Jacobstown, much like Broken Hills, remains a sanctuary to mutants of all kinds, and a couple humans. Though Marcus's top priority is helping a special class of super mutants known as the Nightkin. He seeks to rid them of mental illness. You can either choose to help him find a cure, or cause the demise of everything he's worked to build. Ultimately, again, that choice will be left up to the courier. For a fourth spot, this one is perhaps the best known on the list, though there is something about it you may have missed. Liberty Prime is of course the massive, anti-communist rhetoric-spouting robot used by the Brotherhood of Steel in Fallout 4's main questline. Depending on whether or not you side with the Brotherhood, and if you end up hostile with them, Liberty Prime will either help you destroy the Institute, or you and the Institute can destroy Liberty Prime. Of course, our pro-democracy automated ally also made a very strong debut in Fallout 3's main story, wherein he was still under the control of the Brotherhood of Steel, who would use him during their battle to recapture the water purifier at the game's climax, and again in their final assault against the Enclave during the Broken Steel DLC. Well, Liberty Prime also made a bit of an appearance in Fallout New Vegas. Well, again, kind of. Not in the flesh or steel, but in the paint. As at Big Mountain MT's Higgs Village, as a part of the Old World Blues expansion, a picture could be found in one of the old scientists' homes. That picture displays Mr. House, autocrat of New Vegas and founder/CEO of Roboco Industries before the world went boom, standing before two large, mechanized legs that look eerily familiar. Now, we do know that Liberty Prime was actually developed and built in a joint effort between the United States government and Mr. House's company, Roboco. So this picture does make some sense. Nonetheless, it's neat to know that this Titan of Liberty has appeared in 3 straight Fallout games. And finally, last on our list, speaking of the Brotherhood of Steel, in Fallout 4, the faction is led by the 20-year-old Arthur Maxon. Yes, he's literally the same age as your average college sophomore. Pretty young, but I digress. Maxon's celebrated for bringing the Brotherhood into a new age of prominence and prestige, as under his strict leadership, the faction has expanded considerably, though perhaps at the cost of its moral character, which we were so moved by in Fallout 3. With Maxon's guiding hand, acquiring technology and destroying those who abuse it is the Brotherhood's new top directive, not necessarily helping people as it was in the previous game. Regardless, he's a stern man who speaks with quite a lot of authority and confidence. Alas, this commanding figure stands in sharp contrast to the Arthur Maxon we could come across in Fallout 3. That's right, in FO3 we can meet a young 10-year-old boy in the Brotherhood of Steel Citadel, named Squire Maxon. He was certainly a devoted and disciplined lad. Whenever you'd ask him a question, he'd basically give you the official Brotherhood of Steel response that he already had memorized. On his computer, we could find that his name was, again, Arthur Maxon, and he had a variety of diary and journal entries that gave us some insight onto who he was. Again, a loyal Brotherhood of Steel follower, but he also had a bit of an adventurous side and seemed to love poetry. Regardless, I don't think any of us really expected the Arthur Maxon we met in Fallout 3 to mature into the figure we know from Fallout 4. And with that, we are going to wrap up my top 5 recurring characters in the Fallout universe. Thanks for stopping by, everyone. Which of these identities that we explored today did you find to be your own personal favorites? For me, such an honor has to go to Harold. And what returning Fallout characters do you think deserve a mention that I didn't get to cover today? Leave a comment down below. As always, like ratings are very much appreciated. Thanks for watching, everybody, and hope to catch you all in my next video. Peace out, everyone.